Hello, welcome to Blueprints. I'm your host, Bodine Sanders, and the producer. I've created Blueprints to focus on the positive perspective in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, I have a special guest, Bob Seeley. Allow me to introduce Bob Seeley. I'm a little nervous because I've known this guy for a long time. Bob is a retired executive, business owner,
Yes.
and educator at Delaware County Community College. And Bob and I met a long time ago, I'd say like 25 years ago. And he has a unique story that I think is perfect regarding our conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So my first question to you, as I ask all my guests, is share your positive perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then we'll get into how we met, and into your incredible history and your ancestry.
Well, I played organized football, but unorganized football too. You play pickup games besides organized football, but it's a bond that brings people together. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're short, tall, what church you went to, what your nationality is. It didn't matter. It brought us all together for a purpose, and that was to win. And we had projects in school that we had to work together, not always as individuals, but as a group. And again, you had to work together for a cause, and that was to get an A. And sometimes I got a B, and it wasn't my fault, it was someone else's fault. But you always work together, and organized sports or unorganized sports really made a difference. It enlightened me on the future. So,
very good, very good. Well, let's get into
how we met.
How we met, because from that point we can swing into your ancestor, Thomas Garrett. We met easily 25 years ago.
We did.
At a local convenience store. And I was, it was in the wintertime, and I was standing in line to get some hot chocolate. And I had coffee. And you were in the coffee.
Yeah, I don't know why you don't drink coffee. It's better for you than hot chocolate.
And you actually just spurred up a conversation. You struck up a conversation with me, and I didn't know you from Adam. And from that moment on, probably every other day, we would run into each other at this local convenience store that is well known for coffee. It's coffee. Yeah. And we would just continue the conversation. And I wasn't afraid of that. I wasn't intimidated by that. I welcomed it. I was open to it. And from that conversation, I learned about your ancestor, Thomas Garrett. Tell our viewers about Thomas Garrett.
Thomas Garrett was a abolitionist, a social reformer, and he dedicated his life to put an end to the evils of slavery through the Underground Railroad. He actually grew up in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, but he had a vision from God in 1813, put an end to slavery. And he didn't want to be in Pennsylvania anymore. He wanted to be on the front lines. So he moved his family down to Wilmington, Delaware, which was a slave state. Mm-hmm. But he had modes of transportation there. He had trains to help him. He had boats. He had carriages. By the way, he had a hardware business, and he made many pickups and deliveries in that hardware business. And he was close enough to Pennsylvania, which was a free state, to send many people up Route 52 into Longwood area, mm-hmm. where he had a lot of friends, or up 13 into Darby, mm-hmm. Where he had a lot of friends. But it was working together. It was working together, and he developed friendships in Darby at the Darby meeting. He was Quaker. Mm-hmm. And he developed friendships in Longwood area, because who can you trust?
Right.
It was just like sports years ago. You work together for a cause.
Yes.
And you develop these friendships over a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I'm still friends with a lot of people in sports, but he developed his friendships so he could pass freedom seekers from one place to the other without being caught. But he was caught. He was caught in 1845 for helping the Hawkins family. He was tried in 1848 by Chief Justice Roger Brooke-Tawney, who would later rule in the Dred Scott case. And he was fined $5,400, but he liked the publicity. And they said, I hope it puts your end to your anti-slavery activity. And he said he'll double his efforts. Because he had a vision from God in 1813, he dedicated his life, like many of the other abolitionists, to put an end to the slavery. So again, working together is very important.
Let's talk about Harriet Tubman and that relationship he developed with Harriet Tubman, because we all know, and we have this conversation in America, and we're having it currently, where there are folks who are pushing back, saying, we shouldn't talk about history. And, I'm in the lane of being positive, right? Let's talk about the positive aspects of the things that have happened in the past. And your family history is a positive story. How Thomas Garrett was heavily involved in helping Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad.
It's a love story. People helping people out, no matter where you came, what religion you were, what nationality you were. Harriet Tubman escaped to freedom. He visited Thomas Garrett. She would go back. A lot of freedom seekers, once they got into Pennsylvania or Canada or New York, wherever they ran to, didn't go back again. But Harriet did. Yeah. Harriet went back many times and would stop to see Thomas on her way to help these passengers to freedom, including her parents. Her parents stopped to see Thomas Garrett, and Thomas helped them with money, clothing, then besides a shelter. And if they were injured, a lot of times their feet were like torn up, or they needed medical attention. He provided medical attention, and then he'd send them on to his friends that he developed in Darby or Longwood, and eventually to a guy named William Still, which I'll get into very shortly. So again, it was working together, and who you can trust. If you're caught, you can be punished. And I don't want to get into that. I want to get into positive. And these are positive partnerships, or bonds that last a lifetime.
Yeah, and these stories need to be told. And I know the movie Harriet came out a couple of years ago during the pandemic, right? I didn't see it. I planned on it, but I'd like to think that Thomas Garrett's story should play a major role in the narrative of Harriet Tubman's journey. How do you feel about that?
Well, there was just a short clip where Thomas was helping Harriet into Pennsylvania.
So you saw the movie?
I saw the movie.
Okay.
But it talks about the positive and the relationships and the bond that Harriet had with God. She turned to God on a regular basis for her guidance.
Sure.
So it was very important, the movie, and then it brings in William Still. By the way, there's another movie starring Ed Asner as Thomas Garrett, and Ed Asner as Thomas Garrett, and Blair Underwood as William Still.
Okay.
And it's called Whispers of Angels. And it shows the relationship of Thomas Garrett to William Still. And Thomas used to write to William Still saying, I'm sending a woman and 7 children. And he introduces her and her children to William Still. There's a letter, and he would send a conductor with them into Philadelphia to visit William Still. Sometimes he sent a letter in advance, and he would send the freedom seekers into Chester County, and then maybe Delaware County and Upper Darby to his brothers and his cousins or whatever. So sometimes he'd send a letter in advance, but sometimes it'd be an introduction letter, and the freedom seekers would have the letter with them, with a conductor that Thomas could trust to take him into Pennsylvania.
Nice.
Working together for freedom.
Working together.
Yeah.
As far as you know, is any of this history taught in school?
That's why I started 35 years ago, because it wasn't taught in school, and it's a love story that needs to be told. This part of our American history we should have taught. It wasn't required. Some of the private schools were teaching it, but I started 35 years ago talking to small audiences. I've been working with the National Park Service, the University of Florida. A group came down from Canada to interview me. So we got into social media. We got it into, I asked for pardon for 3 abolitionists in Delaware, John Hunn, Thomas Garrett, and a guy named Samuel Burris. I knew Thomas and John wouldn't get a pardon, a posthumous pardon, because they were federal trials. Samuel Burris was a state trial, and Samuel Burris was awarded a posthumous pardon because he was arrested, put in jail, and then put on the auction block. So, but what it did is educated people about many people working for freedom that work together. So it hit the newspapers, it hit the TV stations, it hit the colleges, and the news spread like wildfire. So it was a positive. And now I'm working on Thomas Garrett with the Senate and the House right now with the, well, you're going to get into that. I'm ahead of you.
Well, yeah. No, you'll get into that. But I love the story because you've shared this information with me over the years. You know, that 1 or 2 minute stop at the local convenience store where I'm pulling, you know, I'm getting my hot chocolate and you're getting your coffee.
And you're drinking your hot chocolate very slow so you can get more information. You know, and you didn't get a small cup of coffee, a 12 ounce. You got the 24 ounce coffee, so you spend more time with me and you sip it.
But I'm intrigued by the story because, you know, I grew up in the South. I never heard the story. You know, we're familiar with the Roots movie, you know, which is an adaptation from the book. But I never heard or was taught about Thomas Garrett or don't remember being taught anything about the anti-slavery movement as I was growing up. So it was very intriguing to learn.
But I had to... saving the history of the Underground Railroad was very, very important. And if you're caught with documentation, you know, bad things could happen, killed, and so on and so forth. William Still saved the history of the Underground Railroad, and he'd later write a book. So when people, freedom seekers, were coming to Philadelphia, he recorded the information, name, siblings, age, as much information as possible, because he wanted to put families back together. So he recorded this information and hid all these documentation, and he had later wrote a book on the Underground Railroad, Underground Railroad by William Still. So he saved the history of the Underground Railroad, but that book was hidden for years. It didn't show up in the classrooms.
Right.
But this is an important part.
Right.
But if we didn't have the William Still's book, then we'd have to rely on letters from individuals. But he put a lot of stuff together. Some people call him the father of the Underground Railroad. His book, I call it the Bible of the Underground Railroad.
I actually saw...
Did you see the book?
That is either a documentary or a program on PBS that they did on William Still. And
he's a hero.
I'm telling
Absolutely
you,
a hero.
If you and I did not have the relationship we had, I probably would have bypassed that. You know what I mean? But because I knew, based on the information and conversations we had, I stopped what I was doing and I watched the entire program.
And if you didn't have the 24 ounces of coffee and only 12 ounces, you only get half the information.
So let's talk about what your efforts are and what you've been trying to do for so many years with here in Pennsylvania and in Delaware.
It's education. Educate, just like Frederick Douglass said. And we have to educate. And lecturing for 35 years and start out in schools and colleges and then eventually get on radio, get on TV, put it on a national level, which we did with Samuel Burris, the posthumous pardon. And social media is wonderful, whether it's Facebook or what other media that we use. So after the pardon for Samuel Burris, I still had to get recognition on a federal level for Garrett and Hunn. So I took Thomas Garrett and talked to a U.S. Senator, U.S. House Representative Congresswoman Rochester. And we got together with the help of the Shad family. The Shad family and the Garrett family worked together years ago.
And that would be Lisa Blunt Rochester. So
do you know her?
I know her, but I know her dad more than I know her. I knew she's a Villanova grad, so we've had a few conversations in the past. But go ahead. I want to give her props.
Yeah. Well, so she introduced it in February. I think it's February 28th, and she's getting the co-sponsors. The state of Delaware asked me to come down and speak, and the House and the Senate fully support all yays. With a standing ovation. I was going to give a 5-minute presentation. When I got there, they said, you have 1 minute. So I took my notes and I decided first paragraph, last paragraph, in between it doesn't really matter.
You made the adjustment. You made the adjustment.
Yeah. And I gave a speech in both chambers, and overwhelming. I had about 10 supporters with me. Quaker Hill Historical Preservation Foundation, the meeting house down there, the museum where we donated a lot of our Garrett, like the silver tea set, pictures, and so on and so forth. So we had a lot of support, still drumming up support. And again, it's all about educating people about a love story, about people working together that bonded together and made lifetime relationships.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. What work do you do with the Underground Railroad? Is that Delaware County or that organization, Underground Road? Is that?
Well, I was on the board of Quaker Hill Historical Preservation Foundation for many years. And then I was involved with the museum. I was involved with the meeting house down in Wilmington, Delaware. I spoke at a couple colleges in Delaware and Maryland, and schools also, and in New Jersey. Been TV, radio. And again, to get the word out, to educate people.
Right.
When Thomas Garrett, when Thomas Garrett was tried and fined $5,400 by Chief Justice Roger Boktani, and they said, I hope it puts your anti-slavery activity. He thought it was a victory. The reason why he thought it was a victory is because it hit the newspapers. It hit they didn't have TVs back then.
Right.
But it spread, that word spread about where he was located and about people wanting to end slavery that worked together. More money came to the Anti-Slave Society. And more support came to put an end to slavery.
Was Pennsylvania the first or one of the first or a group of first to outlaw slavery?
Ooh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But it was a free state.
It was a free state, and Delaware was a slave state. Right. Get on the front lines. He couldn't do much in Pennsylvania, but boy, what a location he picked.
Right.
Because you had many forms of transportation into Pennsylvania, and he developed friendships in Wilmington, Delaware.
Right.
And it wasn't just Thomas. There are many, like the Shad family, who were free. It was a free black family that worked with Thomas. and there were other families within Wilmington, Delaware. So they didn't all come to Thomas's house. They would come to many houses in Wilmington, Delaware, and again they worked together. When Thomas Garrett passed away in 1871, they didn't put his casket on a horse-drawn wagon to go up the hill to the meeting house. 6 black men carried his caskets on their shoulders up the hill.
Nice.
And the streets were lined with people to an overflowing meeting house. The first one to speak at his funeral, her name was Lucretia Mott, who was another Quaker from Philadelphia. And she talked about the light that glowed within Thomas Garrett and how he dedicated his life to put an end to slavery. Unwavering. No matter what he got in his way, his focus was put an end to it. He also met with President Lincoln. There were 6 from Longwood, Progressive Order of Friends at Longwood. There were 6 members that went down to meet with President Lincoln, and President Lincoln starts drafting the Emancipation only days later. 6 people, 3 men and 3 women.
Nice.
Not 6 men.
Right.
You're talking about equality.
We're talking
so
about equality.
why go with 6 men?
Right.
So that's who met with President Lincoln, and only days later, I think it was in July of that year of 1862, they met with him in June, towards the end of June. So it was only days later that President Lincoln said, let's start draft the Emancipation Proclamation.
These are the type of positive stories that I feel need to be shared to demonstrate our ability in tough times to get along, build relationships,
absolutely,
work together for a common cause. And your family story is a perfect example. Right?
And there are many families that the stories need to be told. It's not just Thomas Garrett's story, working with William Still and Harriet Tubman and many others that surrounded Thomas's house. And the churches, the black churches in Wilmington, Delaware, showed appreciation and gave him a silver tea set. And it's on display in Wilmington, Delaware, an appreciation. But again, it was working together. Thomas Garrett gives credit to everyone that worked together. It wasn't about Thomas Garrett, it's about people working together.
Right.
And their relationship or their bond with God. That's why the churches gave him the silver tea set. They recognize that there's where the reward is.
Well, as I've said in all of my interviews, I believe in the spiritual foundation and the sports foundation, because to me they both meet. They both meet in the intersection. And you can learn a lot from it. You can gauge your everyday life movements based on the information that you have and what you've been taught and what that foundation is. How do you feel? You agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree with it. They had the spiritual bond and their relationships. It wouldn't work without that bond together.
Right.
The bond of the people together and the bond of the faith together. The relationships built over the years. Thomas Garrett's relationship with the people in Darby, the people in Longwood. He had developed those relationships in order to make the Underground Railroad a success. In all parts of the country,
right?
Those relationships had to develop.
Well, listen, I think folks who are viewing this will learn a lot. If there's any additional information you want to share with the viewers in your quest to help with what's going on in Delaware, feel free to share that information.
Hopefully the House resolution will go through this year. There's talk about President Biden honoring Thomas Garrett. So we're working on that now. It takes a while. But just being on a program and educating people, I've been doing it for years, and that really helps. So I appreciate you asking me in all these years to come here and talk to you and talk to many people about the Underground Railroad. But I'm upset that you didn't bring me coffee today, and you have your hot chocolate like it was years ago. I expected coffee and hot chocolate.
I'll take care of you. I'll take care of you. Well, listen, I have one more question.
Yeah.
And I ask all my guests this question before I wrap up. What are you hopeful for in the future regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion?
To have it in school systems, to teach us about people working together, a love story. But if you know my family is the UN. We have all different nationalities on the family.
Yep.
I grew up that way, where we work together. School districts, private schools, colleges, we're doing it on air. This is only the beginning. 35 years ago, it's really grown over these years. 35 years ago, I wouldn't be talking to you here. I wouldn't have been addressing the Senate and the House. I wouldn't be on different radio stations. It wouldn't have hit the newspapers years ago. And I'm tenacious with drive and determination, just like Thomas was, just like Harriet was, just like William Still, and Frederick Douglass and John Brown. There's a lot of good stories to tell about people working together.
There are.
It was the beginning 35 years ago about this, and then now it's about this. A lot more being told, and a lot more people telling the story.
Well, I want to thank you, Bob, for coming in to be my guest today.
You owe me coffee. You owe me coffee.
Well, we've come to the end of the program, and I want to thank you again. I want to thank the audience. Stay tuned. There's more to come. We will have Bob and others back in the studio. I'm Bodine Sanders, signing off.